Hi, I'm Kelly Chase and this is History Detective, and today I'm going to investigate one of the most famous unsung women of Christmas legend. Now, normally I don't like to define a woman by her famous husband, but in this case it's a little bit difficult because her husband is one of the most famous chaps of all time. I'm talking about the wife of the legendary beloved Santa, Mrs Claus. What I want to know is, when did she first appear? How much work does she do in the whole Christmas giving operation? And how does she feel about her husband's massive perpetual job as a chimney hopping gift dropper? Does she carry the mental load of this entire operation? Let's dive into the sources and see what we can find out about this unsung heroine who barely has a consistent first name. Although Santa Claus is a character based on a 4th century saint called St. Nicholas, the first time that there's ever a reference to Santa having a wife is not until more than 1,000 years later in an 1848 short story called The Christmas Legend by a writer called James Rees. In the story, two elderly strangers, who turn out to be Mr. and Mrs. Claus, seek shelter at a house on a long journey. After Mrs. Claus asks some questions, they find out that one of their daughters had died. The next morning they wake to find a house full of Christmas presents. By 1878, in a kid's book called Lil's Travels in Santa Claus Land and Other Stories, Mrs. Claus had picked up the administration work of the North Pole present distribution machine. She was in charge of the naughty and nice list. Here's a little extract from the book. There was a lady sitting by a golden desk, writing in a large book, and Santa Claus was looking through a great telescope, and every once in a while he stopped and put his ear to a large speaking tube. While I was resting, he went on with his observations. Presently, he said to the lady, "Put down a good mark for Sarah Buttermilk. I see she is trying to conquer her quick temper. 2 bad ones for Isaac Clappertongue. He'll drive his mother to the insane asylum yet. Bad ones all round for the Crossley children. They quarrel too much. A good one for Harry and Alice Pleasure. They are quick to mind. And give Ruth Olive 10, for she is a peacemaker." From here, Mrs. Claus appears in Christmas pop culture in a variety of iterations. But the one thing she's never really nailed down is having a first name. In the 1970s film Santa Claus is Coming to Town, she was called Jessica and she was a school teacher. Then in a 1985 movie she was Anya. By 2011, Margaret, and some people claim that her name is actually Holly, Mary or Carol. Maybe all of these references are actually to different women, and Santa has been married at least 7 times. This could also explain why every time she is depicted in pop culture, she looks completely different. Perhaps one of my favourite depictions of Mrs. Claus is a poem published in the Adelaide Observer in 1884 called Mrs. Santa Claus Asserts Herself. The poem was written in the voice of Mrs. Claus, and she does acknowledge that she loves her husband, the jolly old soul. But she goes on to explain what a difficult time she has being his wife. She outlines how she worries about him with his stout frame, getting stuck in chimneys and burned by the fires at the bottom, and goes into the bouts of bronchitis that she has to nurse him through due to the exposure to cold on his sleigh. But more importantly, she explains all of the work that she does to make the toys. While I, poor old crone, sit and cower alone, tight clasping the fingers I've worked to the bone, with a nod and a blink, he would lead you to think he had dressed all the dolls ere a weasel could wink. No, while he's in bed, to his shame be it said, it is I who am plying the needle and thread. He goes shopping so grand through the length of the land, but all matters of tastefulness fall to my hand. Mrs. Claus, whatever your name may be, Holly, Mary, Carol, Jessica, Anya, Margaret or Ruth, please know that I see you and the burden of the mental load that you bear during this festive season, while the jolly bearded bespectacled man takes all the credit. Speaking of women and Christmas, I have just released my first book. It is called History, Her Story, Our Story, and it would make the perfect gift for any lover of history. Merry Christmas to all. This is Kelly Chase on The Case. Look what Santa bought me for Christmas.